There is a version of general aviation that most pilots only read about, not the weekend flight to a grass strip, not the Cessna 172 rental on a Sunday afternoon. A version where a single pilot aircraft climbs above the weather, pressurizes its cabin to the equivalent of 8,000 feet, and crosses 6 states without the occupants ever feeling the turbulence below. The Beechcraft B60 Duke was built for exactly that world. It was fast, quiet, pressurized, and capable in ways that most piston aircraft never attempted. And it sold fewer than 1,700 units in 15 years. That number is not a failure of engineering. It is the story of what happens when a manufacturer builds the right airplane for the wrong market, or perhaps the right airplane for a market that was far smaller than anyone hoped. If you are drawn to the machines that push general aviation to its limits, and to the uncomfortable truths about what those limits actually were, subscribe. This channel exists for exactly these conversations. To understand why the Duke existed, you have to understand what Beechcraft was trying to do in the mid-1960s. The piston twin market was crowded at the bottom. Piper had the twin Comanche. Cessna was about to field the 310. These were capable airplanes, but they were unpressurized, moderate-range machines aimed squarely at business travelers and flying clubs. Beechcraft already owned the upper end of that market with the Queen Air and, later, the King Air turboprops. The problem was the gap in the middle, a tier of serious private operators who wanted pressurization and genuine cross-country performance, but could not justify the fuel burn, acquisition cost, or operational complexity of a turboprop. The Duke was Beechcraft's answer. Introduced in 1968, it was conceived as a pressurized piston twin that could carry 4 to 6 occupants in near airline comfort, cruise at speeds that made the journey competitive, and operate in instrument meteorological conditions with the kind of system redundancy that serious flying under instrument flight rules demands. It was, in the language of the era, a personal airliner. It occupied a market segment that Beechcraft essentially invented and never fully managed to sell. The design of the Duke was, by any honest measure, extraordinary and extraordinarily demanding. Beechcraft built it around 2 turbocharged, counter-rotating Lycoming TYO541 engines, each producing 380 horsepower. Counter-rotation eliminated asymmetric thrust concerns on engine failure, which is a meaningful safety margin in a twin. The turbocharging gave the Duke a service ceiling of 30,000 feet, and it kept the airplane performing at altitude where other piston airplanes were gasping. The pressurization system maintained cabin altitude at roughly 8,000 feet, while the aircraft flew at 18,000 feet or higher, and that operational envelope separates serious cross-country instrument flying from everything else in piston aviation. The airframe itself was Beechcraft's signature, a low-wing monoplane with retractable tricycle landing gear, clean lines, and a cabin built to a standard that rivaled the interior quality of light jets of the period. Owners regularly described the Duke cockpit as genuinely professional. The systems, including pressurization, oxygen, de-ice boots, and dual avionics bays, were comprehensive enough that the aircraft routinely flew in conditions that grounded most of the competition. But every one of those design decisions came with a consequence. Counter-rotating engines kept the airframe honest in emergencies, but they meant there was no such thing as a simple parts substitution. The TYO541 was a large, complex engine, a 6-cylinder, turbocharged power plant with an intercooler, specific lubrication demands, and a personality that punished deferred maintenance with expensive results. Where the competing Cessna 310 used a relatively forgiving Continental IO520, the Duke's power plant required diligence and budget in roughly equal measure. The pressurization system added structural complexity and ongoing maintenance demand. The airframe had to be certified and maintained to contain pressurized cycles across its service life, which meant careful inspection intervals, sealant work, and airframe-level costs that, over time, turned casual ownership into a professional operation. None of this was a design flaw. It was the unavoidable price of what the Duke was. In real-world operation, the Duke performed almost exactly as advertised, which is a rarer claim than it sounds. At altitude, it was genuinely fast for a piston aircraft. True airspeeds of 190 to 200 knots at cruise altitude were achievable, and the pressurized cabin meant that crew and passengers could sit at those altitudes without oxygen masks or physical discomfort. For a pilot flying coast to coast on instruments, this combination of speed, altitude capability, pressurization, and twin-engine redundancy was extraordinarily compelling. The aircraft attracted a specific kind of buyer, high-time instrument pilots who flew frequently, usually for business, and who understood exactly what they were purchasing. Corporate flight departments used it. Physicians flew it between hospitals. Charter operators ran it on demanding schedules. For those operators, the Duke earned a strong reputation for doing what it was supposed to do, consistently and capably. Range was competitive, roughly 1,000 miles with reserves and practical loading, and the cabin, while not large by any modern standard, was finished and equipped to a level that made 6-hour flights tolerable in a way that a Piper Seneca never could. Useful load was adequate rather than generous, which meant that a fully fueled Duke required some discipline in loading if passengers had luggage. This was not unusual for pressurized twins of the era, but it was a real operational constraint. What the Duke was not was forgiving of casual management. Fuel system operation required attention. Engine management at altitude, particularly the turbocharging system, demanded understanding. Pilots transitioning from simpler twins routinely described a step up in workload, not because the aircraft was dangerous by nature, but because it was complex, and complexity without preparation becomes risk. This was not a machine that tolerated the minimally current instrument pilot flying 100 hours a year. The weaknesses of the Duke were not hidden. They were the other side of every strength it possessed. Maintenance costs were high, genuinely, predictably, structurally high. The TIO 541 engines had a time between overhaul of around 1,200 hours, and the overhaul cost per engine, even in the aircraft's production era, was significant. Operating a Duke meant budgeting for 2 of those cycles simultaneously, along with the pressurization system inspections, the de-ice boot service, and the avionics stack that serious IFR operation required. Operators who approached Duke ownership with a light aircraft budget found themselves in trouble quickly. Fuel burn matched the performance envelope. The Duke consumed roughly 32 to 36 gallons per hour at cruise power across both engines. For an aircraft that cruised at 190 knots, this was defensible. The cost per mile was not dramatically worse than slower alternatives, given the time saved. But the absolute dollar figure per hour was unambiguous. And in a market where avgas prices were sensitive, the Duke's operating economy never softened. Insurance was a consistent obstacle. Underwriters treated the Duke as a high-complexity aircraft, which it was, and demanded minimum experience and training records that placed it beyond the reach of many otherwise qualified pilots. This was not irrational from a risk perspective, but it created a quiet barrier that kept the potential buyer pool smaller than the aircraft's performance deserved. Parts availability was manageable during the production years, but as the fleet aged and the aircraft moved into second and third ownership, the support infrastructure thinned. The TIO 541 specifically became a point of anxiety for owners and prospective buyers. Finding experienced maintenance shops, sourcing components, and managing the complexity of an aging pressurized airframe requires commitment that not every owner could sustain. And the useful load in practice was tight. A Duke with full fuel, enough for a serious IFR trip, left meaningful weight available for occupants and bags, but it rewarded disciplined loading and punished optimism. For a 6-seat aircraft being pitched to business travelers, this was a recurring frustration. The Duke's reputation in the general aviation community is a layered thing, and it has shifted over the decades. In its production years, it was aspirational, a machine that represented the top of what a serious private pilot could operate. Former owners speak about it with the specific affection that comes from flying something genuinely capable. There is a small, devoted community around the Duke that maintains these aircraft with real care. And within that community, the aircraft's abilities are held in high regard. But the broader general aviation market has always been ambivalent. The Duke earned a reputation for being expensive to own, demanding to operate, and unforgiving of ownership gaps, periods of inactivity, deferred inspections, or pilots who had not stayed current in type. Whether this reputation is fair is a question with a complicated answer. The aircraft did nothing that its design did not demand. It was complex because it was ambitious. It was expensive because it was capable. What the reputation really reflects is a mismatch between what the Duke was and what some buyers hoped they could make it work on. Accident data from the Duke's operational history shows a pattern consistent with high-complexity piston twins. Incidents were concentrated among pilots with insufficient type experience, in deferred maintenance situations, and in the engine and pressurization systems when those systems were not kept current. None of this is unique to the Duke. It is the physics of operating sophisticated machinery at the margins. But because the Duke was never a mass-market airplane, each incident carried proportionally more weight in its reputation. The Duke is not an aircraft that failed its pilots when properly maintained and operated by current trained crews. Within those parameters, it performed reliably, capably, and with a consistency that its community has always defended. The Duke's real significance sits at the intersection of ambition and market reality. Beechcraft built an aircraft that, by technical measure, accomplished what it set out to do. A pressurized piston twin with genuine high-altitude capability, meaningful speed, and a cabin environment that closed the gap between piston and turboprop aviation. That is not a minor achievement. The engineering was serious, and the execution was largely sound. What the Duke revealed unintentionally is the narrowness of the market for that kind of ambition in piston aviation. The operators who needed true pressurization, high-altitude capability, and twin-engine redundancy were increasingly moving toward turboprops by the mid-1970s. The King Air 90 and its successors offered similar operational capability, with better reliability margins and stronger residual values. The piston operators who remained in the Duke's market tier often found the ownership model difficult to sustain across the long term, not because the aircraft was wrong, but because the cost of maintaining it to standard was higher than the alternatives. This is the tension that runs through the Duke's entire history. It was not a machine that promised more than it delivered. It was a machine that delivered exactly what it promised, and then required its owners to keep delivering in commitment, knowledge, and budget in return. General aviation has always had a complicated relationship with aircraft that make that kind of demand. So why did Beechcraft build the Duke? Because in 1968, with the right budget, the right pilot, and the right operational discipline, the Duke was the best pressurized piston twin you could buy. It answered a real question. Could a piston aircraft close the gap with turboprop performance in a package that serious private operators could actually purchase and fly? For the pilots who operated it correctly, the answer was yes. The harder question is whether that was ever enough. The Duke never found the volume it needed to sustain its support infrastructure into the long term, and it was discontinued in 1982 after fewer than 1,700 examples. What remains are aircraft that demand continued investment in maintenance, in currency, in understanding, and a community of operators who have decided that the investment is worth it. The Duke did not fail. It simply revealed, with exceptional precision, exactly how small the market was for an airplane that offered everything a serious private pilot could want, and asked for everything in return. Which classic piston twin should we examine next? One that succeeded by being simpler than it needed to be, or one that overreached just like the Duke and paid the price? Let us know below. And if this kind of honest, technical breakdown is what you come here for, subscribe, because there are more of these conversations to have.